Ever since the election, I've had the theme from The Exorcist stuck in my head.
The man is Heinrich Kramer, and he is writing the most blood-soaked book of the 15th century, the Malleus Maleficarum, the Witch's Hammer, a book that would torment the world for a century after its release, and be responsible for the torture and death of 70,000 innocent people.
Treating of three necessary concomitants of witchcraft, which are the devil, a witch, and the permission of Almighty God.
He goes on to say that female empowerment would bring on the apocalypse. He even made the title of the book Female to hammer home his point. Malleus Maleficarum is a hammer used only on women.
So, we must find the mark. We must find the mark.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude located not far from the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznotz is around here somewhere. Nibbler is in my room, and Lord Squeakington is out and about. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. This is a Hexenhammer episode where Skullbeard and I read chunks of the medieval witch hunting manual. Next episode will be a news episode of some type. I was talking to my brother the other day as we tried to coordinate Mom coming to visit for Thanksgiving, and when I said to him that I had been having trouble sleeping since the election, his response was that I should just stop paying attention to the news. I didn't tell him that I sort of have to because of the podcast. I just mumbled something and we moved on. Hang on. Somebody needs attention. I want to be in the lab. There is, of course, some validity in what he said. After all, much of what is being presented, at least when it comes to Trump, is speculation, and there is nothing that I can do to prevent this or that ass gasket being picked to work in his administration, nor will some of his picks have any impact on my life. But let's be honest here. It's privilege that lets one ignore the news. Because that means the impact of Trump being our next president is likely to be minimal in your life. Granted, for some news sites, it is less what they're saying and more how they're saying it. Whether it's them sane-washing what Trump does, such as describing one of his cabinet picks as controversial when they're dangerously unqualified for the job, or Mueller, she wrote, suggesting on Blue Sky that folks spend $500 to have Matt Gaetz say crazy things on Cameo. Admittedly, the Mueller, she wrote folks did delete that post after they were lambasted for it, but why would you even suggest such a thing to begin with? The most dangerous thing that we can do right now is either ignore what's coming or to try and normalize it in some manner. This isn't like when a loved one dies and you have to get on with your life. Yes, one does have to do the things necessary for their day-to-day survival, but one also has to recognize that their long-term survival, especially if they're a member of a marginalized community, is at risk. Now, granted, most people have the idea that standing up to fascism involves doing something dramatic and heroic. But that's what Hollywood wants you to believe. In reality, it is often as simple as looking out for one another. Longtime listeners will recall that after Trump won the last time, I tracked down the local Democratic Party and got involved, since I knew that Republicans crashed the economy, and if there was anything that I could do to lessen that for people, I had to do it. Not merely out of the goodness of my heart, but because I knew my own neck was on the line. Can I say for certain that I made a huge difference? Or that I got candidates elected? Nope. But I can say that I did everything I could to mitigate the harm that Trump could do. This last election, for the first time in the nearly 25 years I've lived in this town, there were only 2 people up for election who were running unopposed. Prior to this, there were almost no Democrats running for office at the state and local level in my area. However small my contributions to any of that might have been, at least I did something. Additionally, I have expanded my network of friends, which has come in handy in the past when something has gone wrong in my life and I needed help. And I'm able to help others as well. One of the things that I suggested in the Facebook group for our local Democratic Party is that those of us who do some gardening get together and not merely exchange seeds, but also coordinate on who's growing what. That way we're all not growing zucchini or cucumbers, and we don't have to struggle to find people to take the stuff off our hands come harvest time, especially since food prices are going to be higher after Trump takes office. Now, we're not going to be able to grow enough food so that we don't have to go to the grocery store, but those few extra dollars we'll have in our pocket, they'll be important. Maybe it'll enable somebody to get a nicer cut of meat at the store. Maybe it'll help them pay for something that they need around the house, or they can donate it to the campaign of someone running for office. And yes, farming can be tough work, but growing a handful of plants, that's not difficult at all. Additionally, it doesn't even have to be a seasonal thing. Grow lights are cheap, and so are pots. Pepper plants and tomato plants are perennials if grown in a warm enough climate or indoors. I had a ghost pepper plant that I kept alive for years because I had it inside with grow lights for it. The only reason it died was because Houdini knocked it over one day. Equally important, things like this help you focus your mind, so it's not constantly running like a car in neutral with a brick on the gas pedal. And if you're able to focus your mind on something directly in front of you that isn't stressful, it enables you to have the energy to think about other things that you can do later on. Finally, by doing things like this, you create the support structures needed for the larger actions that might be necessary. It is an illusion that Rosa Parks one day simply decided that she was tired of moving to the back of the bus. She worked for the NAACP, and they had decided that it was time to do something about segregation. Rosa Parks was able to refuse to get up from her seat on that bus because she knew that there was a large group of people who would be mobilized the moment that she was taken into custody. Not only would this group ensure that word got out about what had happened, but they had bail money for her, and they had already figured out how to get people to work and elsewhere when the bus boycott started. If you're not building out a network of people you can tap into, start now. And don't announce on social media that you're willing to help anyone who needs reproductive health care get it. That will absolutely bite you on the ass if the worst happens. Let people know in person that you're willing to help them, or drop a coded message online so that folks can figure out that you'd be willing to aid them without you saying, "I'll take you to get an abortion if you need it." Get your friends to download and install secure messaging apps like Signal, Threema, or Bridgeify. Use those to discuss with your friends things like helping someone get reproductive care. And yes, I'm using the phrase reproductive care for a reason, because if folks like J.D. Vance and others get their way, even birth control will be banned, as well as necessary medical procedures related to one's reproductive health, and not just abortion. Use those apps to communicate with one another as much as you can. Don't abruptly leave the various social media platforms, though you absolutely need to leave ones like Facebook and Twitter, since those are controlled by people who want to see America become a fascist state. Gradually begin to minimize your presence on those sites, as this way it'll just appear that you've lost interest in them. Basically, the only reason I still have accounts on Facebook and Twitter is so that I can keep track of a few important individuals who've yet to migrate somewhere else. I share almost nothing on Twitter and only slightly more on Facebook. Go to the show's website and you'll find links to sites that will help you avoid being tracked by the government, as well as places you can turn if you need reproductive health care or you want to help ensure that people who need such things can get them. I also suggest that you check out Octavia Butler's novel, The Parable of the Sower. Not because it just happens to be set in the year 2024 and in many ways mirrors what's happening in the world, but because it has some good survival tips for dealing with what might be coming in the next few years, some of which I have not seen anywhere else. Okay, that's enough of my lecturing you. Let's get to more of Hexenhammer. Yeah, this is future me. So I go to start editing the episode and I quickly realize, oh, there's not a lot that Skullbeard and I recorded in this session, because of reasons. You'll hear part of them. And I'm like, okay, no big deal. I'll just message Skullbeard and we'll make sure we'll record some more tonight. Well, that would have worked, except I had some minor issues with my bike. Nothing serious. It's just that when I went out to do my laundry, the rear fender got wrapped around itself and stopped the bike cold. I couldn't even push the bike. If I was going to move it, I have to pick it up and carry it. So, fortunately, I have that handy-dandy tool set up on the bike, so I was able to saw off the fender. That was the only way I could get it off the bike so I could move the bike. And by the time I got all that done, finished my laundry, it was too late. So you're gonna get some of Hexenhammer, but you're also gonna get some of Skullbeard and I just talking about weird music and other shit. And that meow you heard was Nibbler. He and Fuzznuts aren't slaughtering one another, so I'm kind of letting them wander the house. Anyways, here we go.
Having then shown that man cannot of his own power overcome the devil, he concludes by saying, "Place your hand upon him, but understand that if you have any power, it is yet by divine virtue that he is overcome." And he adds, "Remember the battle which I wage against him. That is to say, the present being put for the future. I shall fight against him on the cross, where Leviathan will be taken within hook." Hey, wait a minute. That is by the divinity hidden under the bait of humanity, since he will think our Saviour to be only a man. And afterwards it says, "There is no power on earth to be compared with him," by which it is meant that no bodily power can equal the power of the devil, which is a purely spiritual power, says St. Thomas Power.
Didn't Homer Simpson call himself Max Power for a while?
I think he might have.
Yeah.
I haven't seen all of The Simpsons.
Yeah, nor have I. How are we looking on recording time?
I got about 33 minutes left, which means we've been going at it for a fuck of a long time. But we're also like 4 or 5 chapters or chapters from the end.
Paragraph.
I wish paragraphs
Yeah.
from the end of the chapters. So
Okay.
might as well
Okay.
press on and start afresh next time or whatever the fuck.
Yeah. But a man possessed by a devil can indirectly be relieved by the power of music, as was Saul by David's harp. There was some other shit going on there.
Yeah.
Or of a herb, not an herb, but a herb.
A herb.
Or of any.
It could be a herb.
It's not capitalized, so it can't be herb. Or of any other bodily matter in which there lies some natural virtue. What could that fucking possibly mean? Other bodily matter in which there lies some natural virtue? I mean, your spit's not contaminated with Satan, or your jizz, or your poop, or your piss? I don't understand.
I don't know.
Therefore, such remedies may be used as can be argued both from authority and by reason. For St. Thomas 26:7 says that stones and herbs may be used for the relief of a man possessed by a devil, and there are the words of St. Jerome. Okay, I gotta ask, how the fuck can stones relieve someone possessed by a devil?
No, man, he's totally saying everybody must get stoned.
Yeah. Sure.
I don't know. I
Not
could
have rock.
That's the best I can come up with.
Yeah.
That's my best guess. And as for the passage in Tobias where the angel says, touching the heart and the liver, which you took from the fish, if a devil or an evil spirit trouble any, we must make a smoke thereof before the man or the woman. Is that like ninja smoke? Or are they going to smoke a fatty or what? We must make a smoke thereof before the man or woman, and the patty shall be no more vexed. St. Thomas says, we ought not to marvel at this, for the smoke of a certain tree, when it is burned, seems to have the same virtue, as if it has in it some spiritual sense or power of spiritual prayer for the future. Yeah, I'm telling you, man, they're huffing the company supply.
Well, I had ages ago, I had a roommate who claimed that he could, because he was really smart or whatever, that he knew how to grow weed that resembled a tree because it was so big. I am, needless to say, a bit dubious of that.
Yeah, well, I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but I had this strain of Hawaiian. It was sitting on a milk crate in a pot, so maybe 2 feet off the floor. And I had 8-foot ceilings, and it went up to the ceiling and across, and then it was coming down, and the fucking thing would never stop flowering. It just flowered forever, and it just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And these things, if they had been outside, would have been probably close to 15, maybe 20 feet tall. That's pretty tree-like for a weed.
Yeah, well, this guy's statement was like, say a 15-foot tall tree, right? Or better, it's going to have a trunk about a foot or so in diameter.
Yeah, about that, yeah.
Well, that's what this guy was claiming that his weed could get. Which I can see it growing tall, but I can't see it growing that wide.
Yeah, and most people grow the stuff that looks like a little shrub. Well, whatever.
Yeah. Of the same opinion are Blessed Albert and his commentary on St. Luke 9 and Nicholas of Lyra and Paul of Burgos on 1 Samuel 16. The last name homilist comes to this conclusion that it must be allowed that those possessed by a devil cannot only be relieved, but even entirely delivered by means of material things. Shop as usual and avoid panic buying. Understanding that in the latter case they are not very fiercely molested. And he proves this by reasoning as follows: devils cannot alter corporeal matter just at their will, but only by bringing together complementary active and passive agents, as Nicholas says. No. My head is not going to try to sort that out.
No.
In the same way, some material object can cause in the human body a disposition which makes it susceptible to the operations of the devil. For example, according to physicians, mania very much predisposes a man to dementia. We're not going down that road.
No.
And consequently to demoniac obsession. Calvin Klein's obsession. Therefore, if in such a case the predisposing passive agent be removed, it will follow that the active affliction of the devil will be cured.
Yeah.
Stroke me.
Well, I was going to say, nah, that's bait, but...
You see that? That's bait.
Mm-hmm. In this light, we may consider the fish's liver. What light is that? And the music of David, by which Saul was at first relieved and then entirely delivered of the evil spirit. For it says, "And the evil spirit departed from him." But it was not consonant with the meaning of the Scripture to say that this was done by the merits or prayers of David, for the Scripture says nothing of any such matter, whereas it would have spoken notably in his praise if this had been so. This reasoning we take fro Paul of Burgos. I'm going to guess that's from Paul of Burgos. There is also the reason which we gave in question 5 of the first part, that Saul was liberated because of the harp was prefigured the virtue of the cross on which were stretched the sacred limbs of Christ's body. This guy's got a real kink for this.
Yeah. And I would much rather it be RuPaul than St. Paul, but...
Mm-hmm. And more is written there which may be considered together with the present inquiry. But we shall only conclude by saying that the use of material things in lawful exorcisms is not superstitious, and now it is expedient that we should speak about the exorcisms themselves, which is quite obvious because Part 2, Question 2, Chapter 6, coming up next time.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Um,
And the only pluggables I've got are the Wayback Machine. Thank you for bringing us the Malleus Maleficarum.
There is a podcast that you might be interested in.
Another one?
Yeah, I know. Are you a fan of the writings of Homer?
I
Obviously, the Iliad is kind of sucky, but the Odyssey is really cool.
I don't believe I've read the Odyssey. So.
How about Game of Thrones?
Zero interest whatsoever.
Oh, okay. Well, there's. I've been listening to this podcast called the Chinese Lore Podcast,
Oh, okay.
and right now the guy who's doing it is reading from a book called Investiture of the Gods,
Okay.
which
It's not a chariot of the gods, or fruit of the gods, or food of the gods. Or...
right no
Okay.
no, but it dates from like 100 years after the Iliad would have been written down, but it's sort of the same story, only it takes place in China. In other words, I mean, you know what the Iliad is about. It's about the Trojan War.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of the same thing, only it's in China rather than in Greece or Turkey. And the dude is the guy who reads it. He's taking the Chinese text and translating it into English, but he's also doing like what we do with this piece of shit, where he's going, oh yeah, So despite the fact that this hasn't worked 50 times in the past, they're still going to do it this time around.
Of course.
Yeah. But and when I say it's like the Iliad, the Trojan War, supposedly, Paris kidnaps Helen, takes her to Troy, and that leads to the whole Trojan War thing because, she's supposed to belong to this Greek king and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Well, in Investiture of the Gods, this Chinese emperor is at this temple to a particular Chinese goddess and is like, wow, she's some hot mama. So I'm going to write on the walls of her temple a poem that says, you're a hot mama and I'd love to bang you. And, the goddess is like, dude, you fucking desecrated my temple. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to send a demon to fuck you up. And that's going to bring down the whole, the whole Chinese empire at this time, blah, blah, blah. Uh-huh. And so I mean, there's like, I don't know how many, because the dude does all kinds of different Chinese literature. And then there's like 70 episodes now of Investiture of the Gods. That's the latest one he's reading. It's worth listening to. And the Chinese television in like 2019 did a series based on it. Oh. And it's on, at least in the States, it's on Amazon with subtitles. And I mean, I haven't watched the series yet, but because I'm waiting for the dude to finish the book on the podcast, but it's kind of worth checking out. At least the podcast. And there's a trailer for the series, but it unfortunately does not have subtitles. But here's the link. I mean, it's not crappy effects or anything like that. I mean, it's a good production quality.
A video from Yukimoto on YouTube?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it doesn't have subtitles, but it's, I mean, you can, the Amazon, it being on Amazon Prime, it does have subtitles, but you can get a good idea of the thing. It is really, really interesting. The book that he's reading, and from the video, from that trailer, it looks like the series will be really good.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It's and like I said, I'm waiting to the end of the dude reading that book to check out the series. But like his next, the next book that he's going to read on the series is Journeys to the West, which is one of the most hugely influential texts in Asia.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. And it's really neat because, or the investiture of the gods is really neat because, like, one of the heroes is in trouble, so he, calls upon this most important figure who is Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and in reading the book, it's like, okay, yeah, but it's like in the Star Wars universe, if somebody called upon George Lucas to help him or something, one of the fictional characters of the Star Wars universe called upon George Lucas to help him fight a battle. That's
like breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah, and the neat thing about the podcast is the dude says, okay, they're bringing in this character who is one of the various Buddhas. He points out, he says, at the time, the events that this story is supposed to depict, which, it's loosely based on actual events, Buddhism wasn't a thing yet. So this is an anachronism.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So, yeah, it's really neat. But like I said, it's now into the, he's now 70 episodes, but they're short. They're like 30 minutes long. So it's not like,
Okay. I've been listening to a lot less podcasts lately and more. I've been listening to entire discographies on Spotify. But it'll only stick to an artist for like 4 or 5 hours, and then it starts playing other shit, and it pisses me off because I'm usually really fucking busy and can't get it back on track.
Yeah, so, well, I'm not a big fan of Spotify because, what's his fucking face? Rogan. They paid
that twat. Yeah. They paid
they paid
$100 million fucking dollars. That's why my Spotify bill went up.
Yeah. But no, I'm one of the things I'm doing because I've realized it makes me feel better is instead of listening to podcasts all the time, at least one day a week, I'm going to listen to nothing but music.
Yeah.
I've
been doing that every day at work, and it's been an improvement. But there's a tweet on X from East End Joe, at East End Joe. If anybody wants to know why Gen X is mad, it's because we had to replace our record collections with a tape collection, that we had to replace with a CD collection, that we had to replace with an MP3 collection, and now need a subscription to listen to music.
Yeah.
So my reply was, can confirm, but you missed the part where an artist whose music we had already paid for on cassette and CD had us banned from a site for allegedly trading copyrighted works during the MP3 stage. But yeah, more or less.
Yeah. And there was a BBC story. I don't know if I have a link to it. I don't think I do. But somebody I follow on Blue Sky posted it, where there's this guy who he's going around and he's finding all these tracks that are not available on streaming services.
Ooh.
And getting the streaming services to make them available. And yes, there are obscure artists that he's doing this for, but there's also really big name artists that he's doing this for. You know, like Annie Lennox and what's her face who married that soccer guy who's like really huge, Beckham, Victoria Beckham. Because, like, I guess she was a singer before she married.
Wasn't she a Spice Girl or some shit?
Yeah, right. Like, but there's a BBC series where like I said, there's a BBC article where the dude is, you know, he's finding all these people, and there are folks who had, you know, in like the 80s and 90s, they had a record deal, and for whatever reason, their album wasn't released. And now, because this dude made it available, you know, convinced the labels to make it available on streaming, these folks are finding fans and are actually going back on. They're going on tour and shit like that. Yeah, because like, and the article says there's something like, you know, 2/3 of all recorded music is not available on any streaming service.
Oh yeah, there's a shit ton of stuff out there. Fuck me.
Yeah.
I have a whole box of cassettes and none of it would be streaming. Well, almost none of it would be streaming. But I don't have anything to play fucking cassettes on anymore.
Dude, I got like all kinds of shit to play cassettes on. Well, it's like, you know, the thing that pisses me off is I was me and some guys I went to college with, we did this band that was just, you know, bug fuck shit, right? And I've lost all the cassettes that we made of it. Although I gave, you know, copies of the cassettes to gal I was dating at the time, and somehow some of the tracks actually made it onto college radio stations in various parts of the country, and I would love to have recordings of that, but
that might be a little too obscure.
Like that ex of mine, she has a very unique last name, but she is apparently very much not online. So I can't find her. I found like her sister, but her sister never liked me, so I'm not exactly inclined to message her and say, hey, could you contact your sister that I dated and get her to send me a copy of, you know, that
if she
song
still
I gave
has
her.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I gave up a bunch of my tapes back in 2009 because I was working at Wally World. You know, the economy had crashed. I didn't have I couldn't, the car I had at the time wasn't working, and I had to walk to work. And one of the guys from Wally World was giving me a ride, and he had a truck from the mid 80s. And it had a cassette deck, and he like listening to stuff, and I'm like, well, I got all these cassette tapes that I'm not listening to anymore. Yeah. Oh, let me give them to you.
No good deed goes unpunished.
I know. I had a buddy who he made me a mixtape of all this really neat stuff, and I lost the tape, but I knew some of the songs, and I was able to track some of them down, but like the website that hosted the tracks went offline because
MySpace?
I don't know. No, it was a really obscure website that the dude did. Like, the dude's obsession was obscure tracks by major artists. And he eventually gave up on it. And so I lost some of the stuff. But, that friend of mine who gave me, who did that mixtape for me, like some of his stuff was really obscure works by John Cale.
Oh.
Yeah. And one of the
John
tracks,
Cale.
which is
Not
you
J.J.
can
Cale.
find.
Not J.J.
No, John Cale.
Oh, okay.
John Cale was in Roxy Music or King Crimson. I can't remember which. And he and Brian Eno did 2 albums together, which are, they were never chart toppers, but they were really good.
Brian Eno, that's Tubular Bells, right?
No, that Tubular Bells is fuck, I forget. Tubular Bells is the soundtrack to The Exorcist, basically.
Uh-huh.
Brian Eno he was King Crimson, and he also did U2's Octoon Baby. He was the producer on that.
Okay.
Oops. Wait. Oh, yeah.
Brian Peter George Jean Baptiste de La Salle Eno, known mononymously known as Eno, is an English musician. It's quite the fucking mouthful of a name for an English musician.
Yeah.
Cordoba.
I just dropped a link to YouTube version of
Cordoba.
Yeah.
There's no rich Corinthian leather in there, is there?
Yeah. No. I have no idea if Cale or Eno knew about this, but there is an excellent novel that would make a soundtrack for, called The Monkey Wrench Gang by Edward Abbey.
Oh, okay.
That's the novel that inspired people to get really, the official description would be terroristic, in terms of protecting the environment.
Yep.
So, like in the novel, they blow up bulldozers that are being used to create, as part of strip mines and things like that.
Yeah.
But the novel, as a work of literature, is fantastic. And then when you consider its environmental message, it is really important. And the sequel, Hayduke Lives, is almost as good. George Hayduke is a character in there, and it was so inspirational that a guy who wrote a whole series of books called Getting Even, as in revenge, he adopted the pen name George Hayduke.
Do I still have one? I might have a Lumpanics Unlimited catalog from about 1994 here somewhere.
Oh.
So it's got all the Hayduke and the Ragnar Benson and the this and the that and the other things. Yes.
Find me, if you still have it, because I don't have one from that period, though I was a subscriber and I did buy lots of books from Lumpanics. Find me some of the drug manufacturing books titles.
Yeah.
So I can see if I can dig them up, find them on eBay and things like that.
Tical and tryptamines I've known and loved, and
yeah.
phenylalanines I've known and loved, and yeah. There's all kinds of groovy stuff out there.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Loom Panics Unlimited is no longer around.
Nobody's stepped up to take their place?
No.
What the
So
dark
if
web
you
is
want to
for.
find a lot of those books, you got to go to eBay.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the Dave Gingery books.
Yeah, Home Forge
if
and fun stuff like that.
Right. If you want them, you got to go to eBay. God damn. Lindsay Publications. That's the printing company that did a lot of that stuff. Yeah, after Dave Lindsay retired, that shit's not available, so you got to find it on eBay or on the Internet Archive.
Oh, hey, I'll bet you that'd be a good place to look for that, actually.
And that's the Lindsay Publications catalog is where I learned about machining and said, I think I need to go to school for that. And then I learned about all kinds of stuff like Discordianism and I knew I had read the Illuminatus trilogy before that, but I did not know that there was an actual book called Principia Discordia until I found the Loom Panics Unlimited catalog. So,
Yep. Oh, I got a minute and a half left on my recorder.
Well, go ahead and pause it because we ain't reading shit more from this.
Yeah, no, we're
That's it for this episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes. It's also on Stitcher, and most of the episodes are on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter at tparkatheist, and it's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to donate to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker.
The podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.